including some logistics. So please feel free to engage with us on social media. We are at Just Schools on Twitter and at Just Schools Fund on Instagram. For this conversation, we will be using the hashtag reclaim SEL. Please use the chat, and we invite you to just use the chat mindfully. Be aware of power and privilege, so refrain from any type of splaining, whether that be cis-splaining, hetero-splaining, white-splaining, etc. We invite you to use the chat to affirm speakers, to share resources, build connections, amplify what resonates, and offer your reflections. We'd also ask that you use the Q&A function of the webinar for any tech and logistics questions. That way we can keep track of those. At the end of the webinar, we will create space for panelists to answer audience questions. So as we're in conversation, please place your questions in all caps in the chat. We'll try to answer as many as time allows. So as those questions come up for you, don't hesitate to please just drop them right in the chat. And so this series highlights the major findings from our radical report, also known as the RADport, that we released last October, that centers organizing praxis and movement towards holistically safe schools. This particular series aims to reclaim social emotional learning from harmful control and management tactics and frameworks, and instead look to culturally affirming social emotional learning that centers and uplifts community expertise. There have been so many conversations across sectors to reimagine education amid a global pandemic, continued racial injustice, a climate crisis, and so much more. And many of these conversations center SEL as a tool for healing, for community building. However, we've seen how well-intentioned SEL initiatives, policies, and practices have been weaponized against young people, specifically Black and Brown young people and LGBTQ+ young people, as mechanisms of control and policing. The narrative has been that to exhibit or to practice SEL, young people must manage or control their emotions and in turn stifle their most authentic selves. This harmful framing is further exacerbated by physical policing of students through harsh disciplinary policies and practices. And together, SEL, school climate, and school safety are used as means to criminalize and punish Black and Brown and LGBTQ+ youth of color, rather than actually create and sustain schools as spaces that are emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, and physically safe. And so for SEL to live up to its true promise, then it must be a container. There must be a container for SEL, meaning that school climate, safety, and SEL must be connected in intentional and holistic ways. In this conversation, we recognize the influence and the impact that federal policy plays in the work to ensure that schools are truly safe. And so my name is Dr. Sierra Kayla Jones. My pronouns are she and her. I have curly brown hair in a low bun and brown eyes. I'm wearing a light green jacket and a white top, and my background is a bookshelf. I'm the Director of Storytelling for Communities for Just Schools Fund, and we are a donor collaborative that links philanthropy with the power of grassroots organizing to transform schools. And as we take a moment here to pause and entering this virtual space, I acknowledge the stolen lands from the indigenous communities of the Piscataway and the Anacostan people. I give honor and pay respect to the lands where the knowledge and the labor that informs our heart's work takes place. I also acknowledge and bear witness to the enslaved labor and the stolen identities of our African diasporic ancestors. I encourage you to pause with me, to pause with us, and acknowledge the stewards of the land that you call home. And as we breathe this out together and move forward in the conversation, recognizing together that we can do so much, that we can build the schools and the world that we all deserve. I share with you our work at CJSF. We are in our 11th year. We were started in 2010 by individuals in philanthropy who understood that in the ecosystem of education justice, grassroots organizers are the least resourced and the most impactful. We have a 64 partner strong network of grassroots organizations, including youth organizers, intergenerational organizing groups, parent organizers, and teacher organizers across 22 states, Puerto Rico, and Toronto, Canada. We have 4 strategic priorities to fund, build, connect, and lead. Fund is on the screen what says, we fund organizations that change schools and the systems of education through community organizing. Build, we build the capacity of our partners by growing their strategic know-how on everything from communications to data analysis. Connect, we are dot connectors. We foster relationships between our partners in philanthropy, policy, research, advocacy, national movement leaders, and others. Our webinar today is part of this connect work. And we also lead. We lead efforts together with our partners to make school discipline, transformation, and positive school climate a priority for philanthropic organizations, policymakers, and national allies. And with that, I'm so excited to pass it over to my colleague, Jamie Coppell, who will ground us in the context and in the conversation today.
Thank you so much, Sierra. And thank you to all of our speakers and to our guests for joining us today. My name is Jamie Coppell. My pronouns are she, her. I have short, dark brown hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing a blue sweater and I'm using a blurred background. I'm the co-director at Communities for Just Schools Fund. And before we invite our panelists to share their wisdom with us today, I'm going to offer a little history and context to frame where things stand before we jump into a conversation that seeks to offer insights into federal legislation and its connections to communities and to education. Our goal is that we all leave here with a deeper understanding about what is necessary to ensure that federal legislation, that federal grant making, and that federal enforcement efforts are aligned around a vision for holistic safety in schools that speaks to the vision of our partners at CJSF. So for a moment, I'm going to invite us all to jump back in time to the Obama administration. There were some pivotal and promising executive branch efforts uplifted in those years that included incredible coordination, in particular by the Departments of Education, Justice, and Health and Human Services. Through the Supportive School Discipline Initiative and then Rethink Discipline, the Civil Rights Enforcement Offices, in coordination with federal grant-making offices, not only released what was, for the time, groundbreaking federal school discipline guidance, they also moved significant grant dollars to states and districts to encourage the creation and implementation of positive school discipline policies and practices. Unfortunately, there was also dissonance in federal agency actions in those years. For all of the good executive branch actions around positive school climate and discipline, there were simultaneously investments in school policing infrastructure, largely in supporting the maintenance and growth of school resource officer programs, even though then and now, Black and brown students overwhelmingly attend schools that are heavily policed and underfunded. I'll remind us all that according to the US Department of Education Civil Rights Data Collection, millions of students attend schools with police officers, but no counselors, nurses, psychologists, or social workers. And so this lack of investment in student support services and overinvestment in school policing exacts not only a physical toll on many Black and brown students in particular, but also an emotional, a psychological, and an intellectual toll. The presence of police officers in schools and of policing approaches by other staff has created learning environments that prioritize punishment, exclusion, and disposability that is denying Black and Brown students an opportunity to learn. All students deserve learning environments that are holistically safe, but that is a promise that has yet to be extended or fulfilled. And that's largely what we're going to be here to talk about today. Continuing our kind of brief foray into history, after the tragedy at Newtown, federal agencies' grant-making was not aligned around how to advance a vision for holistically safe schools. And this led to disjointed messaging and investments in school safety and tepid investments in growing supportive staffing, training, and infrastructure. Like I said, there was much good that happened, but a coordinated and aligned vision for safety in schools was lacking in those years. The positive progress made in those years offers us a roadmap for today, a way forward towards federal investments and legislation that support holistically safe learning environments. And that is what I would hope we could all hold on to together. We know what we need to do. Before we talk about the current moment in which we find ourselves, I'll touch just briefly upon the harms of the 45th administration. We saw increased investments in hardening. Corporations lined up to profit in the aftermath of the Parkland tragedy, selling their wares to school districts and to states. And the federal government and states and districts were eager to demonstrate action in the aftermath of this tragedy. And they did so largely through investments in school hardening that were not accompanied sufficiently, or in some places at all, by increased investments in positive supports. We really saw a whole industry emerge in this time of virtual learning that allowed for unregulated digital surveillance of students and families and of educators. We saw increased investments in flawed behavioral threat assessments that too often assume a perspective on who is dangerous and what danger is like that misses the entire purpose and point of looking to lift up holistic safety. We saw congressional and executive branch support for building a role for Homeland Security in schools that continues today. These investments and approaches can be best summarized as a season in which the federal government layered harm upon harm, or claimed to be fixing one harm with another harm. Many states followed suit. We know that now, today, now, it is time to not only undo these harms, but to do work we've been talking about for a long time, doing the harder work to create cultures of connectedness in schools. Together we can end harmful investments that prioritize physical safety and security measures that do not foster holistic safety in our nation's schools. We have to do some really concrete things together, like shining a light on harmful programs like DOJ's grant programs and the Department of Homeland Security's programs that offer funding to be used for police hiring, development, surveillance, hardening measures. Programs like the School Violence Prevention Program, Community Policing Development Microgrants, and the Bureau of Justice Assistance's Stop School Violence programs. The elements of these programs that are prioritizing and emphasizing hardening without giving any attention or enough attention to positive school climate and culturally affirming programming and training. If we don't do this, then the innovative programs, the good that is being done, that is being lifted by well-intentioned actors, will always be in conflict and competition with these efforts. That is the learning we must carry from the Obama administration into this era. We must build on what we learned. And to do any of this well, there are a few things that just simply must be in place. And this is where I will turn briefly to the long unfulfilled promise of congressional action in support of creating truly safe and supportive learning environments. Congress must send a clear and undiluted message to states that they may no longer use corporal punishment or the harms of punitive seclusion and restraint. And Congress must make a massive investment in positive school climate in the ways that we'll be talking about today. There are 3 bills, among many, that if passed by Congress, would put in place the basic conditions, or at least the preconditions, for really being able to advance and ensure positive school climate that is aligned with the vision CJSF's partners and allies are advancing in communities and states across this nation. A vision that we named for the Biden administration in the transition memo drafted a year ago now that we'll drop into the chat. If we can go back 1 slide, actually. There we go. The first bill is the Counseling Not Criminalization Act. This bill would fundamentally change federal investments in school safety and prohibit the kinds of harmful investments I've named. And it would offer long overdue investments in positive supports for building and sustaining holistically safe learning environments. Now, in instituting a $5 billion grant program, we lift that it will be really important to ensure that these funds go to culturally affirming supports. CJSF and our partners have been working to reclaim social emotional learning. That's what brings so many of you here together with us today. We want to reclaim social emotional learning from harmful control and management tactics and frameworks. And we all know that well-intentioned things like social emotional learning can be co-opted, it can be weaponized, especially against Black, Brown, Indigenous, LGBTQ+ young people and young people with disabilities. The second and third bills, the next one is the Protecting Our Students in Schools Act, or POSA. And this bill would eliminate the use of corporal punishment, which is still actively in use in 19 states in this country. It would aim to ensure the health and safety of students and staff, promote positive school climate and culture, and assist states and districts in implementing supports, ensuring programs that staff have the appropriate trainings and supports, and also collect and look at data around exclusionary discipline practices. The third bill is the Keeping All Students Safe in Schools Act, which would prohibit and prevent seclusion, restraint of all kinds, mechanical and chemical, and other dangerous restraints that limit students' ability to breathe. If we can end the slides. I'll just say this is intended to be a super quick, high-level overview of these 3 bills. And we're not arriving today to say to all of you, these bills are perfect. In fact, we actually think there's really important work that remains to ensure that these bills are individually and collectively aligned with efforts to end all forms of policing in and around schools. But we also hold as an article of faith as a critical precondition for advancing safe, holistically safe schools that we cannot allow for the existence of corporal punishment, for the use of seclusion and restraint, or for tepid investments in positive school climate. What we need now is for Congress to take action to uplift the kinds of approaches, the supports, the resources that CJSF and our partners name and do the harder work, create cultures of connectedness in schools, and in reclaim social emotional learning, centering organizing praxis for holistically safe schools. The resources that so many of our partners, including the speakers who are here with us today, are advancing in the world, offer us a roadmap. The work of the National Campaign for Police-Free Schools, Center for Popular Democracy's supported youth mandate, and the efforts of the Coalition to End Corporal Punishment in Mississippi, which is held by Nolly Jenkins Family Center, are just a few of the resources that point us to how federal action must be accountable to what local communities are demanding. Now is the time to consider not only how we get effective federal legislation passed, but also what the impact of that legislation will be on local and state level efforts. Now is the time for those considerations. And so we're joined today by an incredible group of folks who grapple with this question in their everyday work as organizers, as advocates, and as attorneys. And so together, we're now going to talk about what we need in federal legislation and how our thinking around that is really driven by leaders in the education justice movement like CJSF's partners and allies who are here today. I will say, as we dive into the conversation, that until we end corporal punishment, efforts to embed culturally affirming social emotional learning will not succeed. Now is the time to get this done, for schools to be positioned to model their commitments to holistic safety in the ways that Reclaim SEL invites us to do. It's time to grow forward from initial efforts years ago now to program technical assistance around positive behavior interventions and supports and restorative justice, and to embrace a frame that is really about transformation, to support states and districts in using their resources in transformative ways. And I will say, as a public school parent, as a mother, that the stress of this return to school moment reflects the urgency of embracing the need to center love and belonging as central ingredients to creating school communities grounded in belonging. This is everyone's work, folks on the ground, advocates, federal actors of all kinds. And with gratitude to you all for taking the time to be with us, I'm going to say, let's get started with the conversation.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for that overview. And I know that we are so thrilled at CJSF to be able to launch into the panel conversation. So it is an honor and a privilege to be able to introduce our partners, our friends at Nolly Jenkins Family Center. Today, we are joined by Ms. Ellen Reddy, Executive Director of Nolly Jenkins Family Center and co-founder of the Mississippi Coalition for the Prevention of a Schoolhouse to Jailhouse. And we're also joined by Kamisha Smith, who is the Youth Program Coordinator at Nolly Jenkins Family Center. So Ms. Ellen, so grateful to be in conversation with you, and also just really appreciate all that I've been able to learn from you over the past couple of years. And for years, you all have been leading the efforts to ensure a complete end to corporal punishment. So can you share your insights from this work? How are school districts perpetuating further harm by funding SEL programs, but then not getting rid of corporal punishment?
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the honor of being here this afternoon. And Sarah, thank you for acknowledging and bringing into the space our ancestors, because we know that our DNA runs through our ancestors, and we're all here doing this work. I have to acknowledge that we stand on land here in Mississippi from the Choctaw and Chickasaw indigenous community. So I want to acknowledge that and bring that into this space as well. But as you said, since 2012, the organization has had an intentional campaign to eliminate corporal punishment here in the state of Mississippi. But as I put together this presentation and thought about this, our initial introduction to corporal punishment really happened in the early 2000s. We received a phone call from a parent in one of the community schools whose child was being mistreated. Not only was he being administered corporal punishment, they were doing humiliating things, like she would call this child to the front of the class and place a chair and ask the child to sit, and then she would snatch the chair. There were days when he would come to school, she threw his shoes inside the trash can. A parent reached out to me and my twin, who did this work with me earlier on, and asked, what could we do? This was the first time as an organization we brought young people, the voices of young people, into this work. These were elementary kids who were being mistreated, and we organized them and we asked them, what was going on? How did it make you feel? How did they feel knowing that there was a targeted child being abused like this? We captured what they said. And interesting enough, the entire school was complicit because the teachers, the principal, everybody knew what was going on. But we organized these young people and told their story. We went to the school board, and eventually the principal was moved to the district office and the teacher was permitted to resign, which meant she went on to another school district and mistreated children the very same way. So that was early on. If you think about it, that was early on in 2000. And then in 2012, there was a lot of violence going on in our communities. And we sent young people out with a notepad and pencil and told them to observe in different spaces, public spaces like the laundromats, supermarkets, in their own homes, in schools, what was really going on. And those young people brought back incidences that they observed, parents snatching and cursing young children inside the school buildings. A student may ask to go to the restroom and the teacher would say, you know, what are you going to do? You know, they held the toilet paper in their hand. What are you going for? Number one or number two? Those kind of humiliating things. And part of bringing young people into this work, keep in mind, we are in a southern state, we're in Mississippi. Children should be seen and not heard. And this was the first time we lifted the voices of those young people to really tell their stories. So the community pushed back. You know, why are they involving children in this mess? Children shouldn't be involved. What's going on in the classroom? We were clear. If the children who are inside the classrooms do not have a voice, what are we really doing? So it was really our first effort at bringing the voices of parents and children into this work. That was one of the insights, that children should be seen and not heard. The second insight, I think, for us was this whole notion of, we were Black women pushing the system. We were Black women lifting up this secret that is very much a part of our community. Remember, what goes on in the homes and in the classroom stays there. So we were saying, no, it shouldn't stay there. We're going to bring it out. We're going to make it public. So we got pushback. It was a very hostile environment. As a matter of fact, my sister and I would always teach each other who was going to get physically be removed and tossed from the room because it was just that hostile people pushback. But we recognized that we had to keep pushing because it was too important to leave alone or to leave to someone else. So in 2012, there was an intentional push to eliminate corporal punishment. We did things like we organized, some of community members went to the school board. We advocated for children inside of discipline hearings, probable cause hearings. We even filed lawsuits against the district. But we also knew that there was a chill because, again, a woman has a place in the South. And here we are, Black women, pushing this envelope to say, no, our place is where our children are. We used to have a saying, if our children going up in there, we're coming up in there with them. And so we took that position. So those are just a few of the insights that we really had to fight for our children and organize and build a support and a base for families because, you know, again, when ordinary folks start to raise their voice and say, this is wrong, people push back. They could be isolated and destroyed. And keep in mind, the school district provides more employment than any other system or any other business in our community. So many of these parents were involved in the school, whether they work for the school district as bus drivers, cafeteria workers. So we were really walking a very thin line because we knew they could lose their jobs. But we pushed forward with that because we knew we were righteous in what we were doing and it was the correct thing to do. I thought about one example of how SEL can do harm inside the school districts. One of the department's priorities, legislative priorities for 21 was the increase in early education for every child, okay? That was one of their priorities. So they were going to increase early childhood spending. And so what they ended up doing, as a result of that, we serve 3,016 four-year-olds inside the public schools. We have 18 early learning collaboratives, 175 classrooms across 97 sites in the state. So when you think about, even when you have four-year-olds in a school, if corporal punishment is allowed, these are our very young children. And we know from neuroscience what can happen when very young children are exposed to violence early on. It can change their how they respond. It can change their development. So when we really think about, this is a legislative priority coming from the Department of Education, but we still have corporal punishment. We're still going to beat those four-year-olds inside of our schools. So that's a good example of how we really not thought about when we make decisions, or when policymakers make decisions, we really have to think about that. It's scary for me to think that our very young children can be administered corporal punishment by an adult inside of a school building. State-sanctioned violence is not okay against our children. It simply is not. The other scary thing, I guess, about that, when we really think about the importance of federal legislation, as a Southern state, we all know that change did not come as a result of those Southern states making change. Oftentimes, it was federal legislation, federal policy that pushed those states to make the kinds of changes that we're talking about. We certainly can't forget Brown v. Board of Education in the state of Mississippi. It didn't happen until 1971, and that was after 2 additional lawsuits against the state of Mississippi. Even when we did our juvenile justice work, it did not happen without the Department of Justice coming in and saying to the state of Mississippi, you can't treat your children like that, guys. You just can't do it. So it is important that federal legislation really sets the tone and say to states, you have no state rights when it comes to children and in a public sphere. States' rights, even the word makes me nervous in my stomach, because in essence, it really is a buzzword for we will treat our children or our citizens the way that we want to, and the federal government should not interfere. Because remember, and we have to keep in mind, those same states that we're not talking about, Jamie mentioned 19 states who still use corporal punishment. 10 of those states are Southern or from the Southern region. And so we know when it comes to state rights, these are the same states that seceded and became the Confederate States of the United States. Let's be clear about what we're talking about now. We're talking about deep-rooted white supremacy, Jim Crow, and segregation. It has always had its roots. As a matter of fact, at this point, I want to share my screen because I want to talk about how we really think about our work and how we provide education and share with our community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the historical roots of corporal punishment, if that's okay. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, you're not able to. I'm not able to. Am I able to share? Okay.
Right now.
I'm not able to share my screen, but I want to talk a little bit about historical roots of corporal punishment and the work we're doing on the ground in communities and throughout Mississippi. We call it the legacy of the lash. Okay. It's clear the within the history has its origins in slavery, white supremacy, Jim Crow, and segregation. It also has its roots deeply planted in religion, and the deep South, where it intersects with the history of lynching. The whip of the lash was used as a tool for power, domination, and control of slaves. It was inhumane, but it was a way to instill fear and punishment into the slaves. Long after slavery was abolished, the legacy of the lash continued in homes, schools, and communities, which is why there is so much pushback against the work that we're doing here in Mississippi. Just like the thought of slavery that was so deeply rooted in beliefs, many parents who were beaten by their parents, or who were beaten by their parents, and so on, feel the legacy of the lash must live on, or our children will be out of control. In biblical terms, we say, spare the child, spare the rod, spoil the child, is typically what we believe. I don't want to minimize the thinking and the work of our foreparents, because they did what they needed to do. If we teach our children to be obedient and know their place, they surely won't face death when they are out on the street or away from us in this world. This is hard work, but it's also our heart work, because we're going into homes where we're speaking to and about undoing generational harm and trauma, from violence to a place of peace and understanding. Our work has been not to only eliminate corporal punishment, but to research, develop, and introduce effective alternatives, because we know and believe that our students respond holistically. They have to be taught conflict dispute skills. They need to be introduced to meditation. They need to be introduced to peer mediation and restorative justice practices. They deserve effective counselors, police-free schools, mental health practitioners who genuinely see their value and their potential. They need social emotional learning grounded in their own identities, culture, and history. And that comes from a place of dialogue and praxis. But above all, they deserve real love and not punishment fueled by anger rooted in racism and anti-Blackness. None of this can happen unless it's intentional, unless there is accountability at all ends to push policy and provide resources to hold district and public and elected officials accountable.
They can still see you. They can still see you.
So Jamie, I hope, Sarah, I hope I've responded to the questions that you wanted me to respond to and didn't take up too much time, because this really, really is our hard work, because no child is safe. Even unborn children in Mississippi are not safe as long as we have corporal punishment. And those 3 federal bills together, I think will make a difference in the way that we treat children in Mississippi.
Ooh.
Thank you.
Oh, Miss Ellen, thank you so much for sharing that. Everything from the historical context, the roots, and the long withstanding legacy of what it has always looked like, of any way to continue to control and management, to create control and management tactics and frameworks, really as a way to police, to punish, to criminalize, as a way to continue on in a white supremacist patriarchal society. But one thing that I appreciate about your work and Nolly Jenkins Family Center's work is how you not only point us to what we need to dismantle and what we need to disrupt, but you also provide a roadmap forward. So everything that you are sharing, from the meditation to really just grounding and rooting our educational system in love rather than punishment and control and conformity, but really moving into a place where young people and adults are able to tap into their most authentic self. And to be able to do that, there has to be an environment for it. There cannot be corporal punishment. There cannot be harmful tactics and ways to control and conform. So thank you so much for always pointing us to the North Star, pointing us forward. It's so appreciated.
And Sarah, I do want to add this. When we talk about counselors and mental health practitioners inside of school buildings, I'm often taken back because those resources also work for teachers inside that space. And so one of the things we've got to talk about, where can we find common ground? That's a common ground, because our teachers come from our communities. If we are faced with these, poverty and all these conditions, living in this racist society, we take all of that into the classroom. Where do we have a chance to unload that unless we are working with young people and valuing young people and even talking about our own stuff that comes up. And so I do want teachers and administrators to understand that what we're asking for isn't just for students, it will also benefit them. So thank you. I just wanted to add that piece.
Yes, 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 absolutely. And especially as you ground us in the historical context and your context in Mississippi, as you talk about the legacy of the lash, how that shows up internally. And I know that you and I have had some really powerful conversations about how emotions and trauma manifest in the body, and then how we bring that everywhere with us. So this work is critically important for all of us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'll pass it over to Jamie to bring in our next panelist.
Thank you, Sierra. And just echoing your thanks to Ms. Ellen, to Kamisha, common ground. Let's hold that language and all that is packed into it. One of the things that fills me with hope is the fact that each of the speakers today models in their work as an organization, as an individual, the importance of building a base of folks with a shared analysis and vision for what it is going to take to build the kinds of liberatory education models that our children deserve. And so with that in mind, I'm going to transition to our next speaker. Kate Torenzi is the Deputy Director of Education and Justice Transformation Campaigns at the Center for Popular Democracy. And since Kate joined CPD in 2016, she has focused on CPD's work to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. Kate partners with Black and Brown youth-led groups in CPD's a network across the country to end policing in schools and to invest in safe, supportive, and inclusive public schools. And again, holding that language of common ground, I have so appreciated watching the intentionality and thoughtfulness of the work CPD has done with so many of us and with their own youth-led affiliate groups and other partners, in particular, to create a youth mandate. So Kate, I'm going to give you several questions and invite you to respond as you see fit. But those questions for you today are, can you tell us more about the youth mandate? And can you tell us what you see and what the groups you are working with and supporting see as the possibilities of the Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act? And how would you want us to know that grassroots organizers' efforts are shaping and can shape this legislation? And then, as you see fit, what do you think is what is going to be necessary for it to be passed? And then what comes next? What's the vision for what is possible once we get Counseling Not Criminalization passed? Thanks for being.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks everybody who's joining this webinar. Again, I'm Kate Torenzi, she, her pronouns, and the youth mandate, I'll start with the youth mandate for education and liberation. And so that was a project that was put together over really the course of years to think with young people, Black and Brown young people in our network, the folks leading this work, about what their vision was for supportive, inclusive, liberatory, fun, creative schools, right? The schools that they wanted to be in, the education systems that they wanted to be in. And so we worked across our network and with the Alliance for Educational Justice and Advancement Project at the beginning of this project to really align around core sets of principles. What does it mean? What are young people really demanding? And the focus had some key pillars. First, really centered around police-free schools. And kind of in the theme of this conversation, we knew that we couldn't just say we want the good stuff. We want the things that help young people thrive. It also, if a young person is walking into the school and the first thing that they encounter is a metal detector or a cop, or they're seeing people policed and harassed, even if there are investments in the classrooms, even if there's other supports in that school, the community is fractured, that school becomes a place of hostility and surveillance and not support. And so one of the central theme around it is the need for police-free schools to dismantle all the policing infrastructure and then really invest in building a liberatory education system. And one of the ways we talk about that is around funding education and non-incarceration. And there's a number of demands in the youth mandate, but it really is focused on the principles of that, right? That like we need to be putting our money, resources, time, commitment towards education and towards positive supports, and nothing towards surveillance and breaking and policing, and breaking down all of those systems. And so that's sort of where it came from, but really those principles came out of decades of organizing. Those are the demands that young people, community members, parents have been moving for a really long time. So it's just stating those together, coming together on those, and putting it in sort of a package, but it's really the common demands that we're seeing in local campaigns all across the country. And we, it looks like in the chat, the website got put in the chat. We really encourage everybody to sign on and show their support for the youth mandate. And that also will get you connected into a lot of the work that's moving in association with it. And so kind of moving to the second question around the Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act, this youth mandate is for all levels of government, local, state, and federal. Not any one area of government can do it alone. If locals are supporting policing and incarceration, if the federal government stops it, there's still the wrong environment in schools, and vice versa. Like the federal government keeps pouring money into policing in schools, it provides the wrong incentives. So it's for all levels of government, but at the beginning of this year, with the change in administration, new Congress coming in, we really wanted to see what the possibilities were, what we could be calling on the federal government to do right now to follow young people's vision. And one of the things that came up was this Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act, because it follows those principles, right? It will end federal funding for police and schools, and create a $5 billion grant program that Jamie talked about at the beginning for the positive supports, and that those two are connected to each other. So to get access to the grant program, you need to have committed to removing police from schools. So those are deeply tied. And we think that there are a lot of possibilities with this, right? If the federal government ends federal funding for police and schools, it really shows a signal to local governments. It's saying that resources should not be funneled into policing and criminalizing young people and really should be used for investments. It also, for some districts, will mean that they don't have the finances to continue policing in schools, that it can really stop that. We've seen that some districts have started their policing programs through these federal dollars. So there will be tangible, concrete impacts on policing, and also will help feed into supporting local campaigns because the federal government will have signaled this change in priorities. You asked about how like grassroots organizing efforts shaped this, right? This was not an idea that just some like smart federal legislator, we really appreciate the co-sponsors of these bills, Senator Murphy and Representative Presley, that they just came up with, right? Like the conditions were set by local organizing. Organizing is the only reason that we are at a place that we could even have a federal bill like this. It's through the work that we saw the unprecedented progress towards police-free schools, towards ending policing, and chipping away at those policing budgets in school districts that got us to this point. It would have been impossible for this to start and have any momentum without that work. We have every intention of those local organizing groups, right, holding people to this line as it gets shaped down the road. That this is a bill that we are deeply committed on the principles of it, and that young people and community members are going to hold all of us to that, and it's only through organizing that it gets passed. And so we're at kind of an exciting point, and where we really think that this bill will become law. It's the timing of when that happens is the part that we need to work on, right? But to get to that point, we need all of you, everybody who's listening to this call, all of the organizing groups associated with folks on this call, and all of the organizations that we work with. The big push is to get co-sponsors on the Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act. And to get those co-sponsors, they need to be hearing directly from people in their communities calling to get this passed. And so there's a link in the chat for you to make calls. You can click on that. It'll you put in your information. It'll get you directly to those folks to say that we're demanding for them to pass the Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act now and join as co-sponsors. And we think that with this momentum, right, that we can set the stage for increasing conversations, having a hearing next year or in the future to ensure that people are hearing directly from young people about the impacts of policing. And there's a whole network of organizations that are working on it, including more of the folks that you're going to hear from later in this conversation, but certainly led by the Federal School Discipline and Climate Coalition that we are a part of. So we hope everybody will join in this and really build the momentum necessary to get the co-sponsors so that we can not only see this at the federal level, but also create the momentum and build on the momentum that has been created through the local organizing efforts that have been happening for decades.
Thank you so much, Kate. I just holding that kind of reminder that this is long work. So many of the folks who are here today, yourself, Ms. Ellen, so many others have created the conditions that mean now is the time. So let's get this done. You offered a beautiful introduction to our next speaker with some of your words, actually. So I'm going to invite Dara Baldwin to join us on the stage here virtually. And say that Dara is the Director of National Policy for the Center for Disability Rights and a leader in the Federal School Discipline and Climate Coalition that Kate just mentioned a moment ago. Dara, we are so glad that you are here with us today. I have never left a conversation with you without learning more things that can fill more than a page of a notebook, for sure. And want to invite your wisdom, all of the knowledge that you have, and the intention with which you have always approached your work when it comes to being grounded in smart, savvy strategies about how things move here in the Washington, D.C. area and how they must be connected to the efforts, needs, and demands of local groups. So we are grateful for the ways in which you always move in that. I'm going to throw a bunch of heady questions at you and encourage you to sort through them and share your wisdom with us all. So one of the things I've always appreciated about you is that you are a lobbyist. And so in that work, you have taught so many of us a lot about, for folks who do not work in that way, who are not lobbyists, which is most of the folks who are joining us today, what would you want us all to know about how we can support the work that you are doing as a lobbyist? So that's number one. And then would invite your reflections on what other bills are moving in the federal space that would remove policing infrastructure, and why does federal engagement around those bills and those efforts matter? And then, if you can, to tease out a little bit about some of the bills we've named today. The 3 bills we've named today are new and were only recently introduced. Others have been around for a very long time. So what would you want us all to know about that? And then we welcome, if there's time, your insights around what does it signal when a member of Congress decides to sign on or not sign on in the ways that Kate just pointed us to as so important to CNC, or the Counseling Not Criminalization Act. So invite your voice in with gratitude to you for being with us.
Thank you, Jamie. Peace and blessings, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity to speak to the community about such important issues. And much love to my fellow panelists, Ms. Ellen, always giving you graces. Kate, thank you for your work, and Ashley. And the first thing I'll say is that a lobbyist is not bad. When I told my parents, who are activists, I'm becoming a lobbyist, my father lost his mind, and I said, no, Dad, I'm a lobbyist for social justice. And what that really means is that I am a federal registered lobbyist. I have a license number. I have to fill out a form every quarter and tell Congress how many hours I spent lobbying, if I donate money to a candidate, that kind of thing. And that's because of the way in which my organizations that I have worked for were set up. You have a lobbyist for the gas people. They only pass bills for automotive and gas things. I pass bills for everyone. And just so you know, there's only about 7 Black women who are registered federal lobbyists, and there's over 5,000 registered federal lobbyists, just so you guys know. Now, you know, a lot of people here in DC do policy work, but they're not registered federal lobbyists because they're 501c3s, so they're working with nonprofits. So I just wanted to put that ahead because I know people hear that word and it just, So anyway, I have been on the Hill since 2004. So I kind of know this work. I work for the Center for Disability Rights. We are a SEL, a non-residential center where people with disabilities go for services. And I live and work in DC. DC statehood, I have to say that while I'm on here. So to answer a couple of questions, one is, what is the importance of the federal process of this? And Kate gave a very good history, but I will tell you, I've been doing this work since 2008 is when the Federal School Discipline Coalition came together with the wonderful Allison Brandt, who has passed, left us with a great legacy, and Chris Scott, who's there and leading it. And it took us from, I would say, 2005 to literally last year, 2020, the reckoning of the summer, as I call it, of Black Lives Matter, to get a person on the Hill, a senator or a House member, to say, yeah, I'll do this bill. We had that policy brief was written in 2008 with this language. So I just need you to understand that, right? That was 2008 to 2020, 12 years. Because there's a political backlash on this, and now even saying defund the police is a bad thing. And so it's been very hard to get this bill written and get some members of Congress to actually say, I will sponsor this and put my name behind it and get it moved in Congress. And I'm going to talk about the hard time we're having to get others to say, yes, I'll vote for this. So reason federal is, very important is that, once you get a bill passed federally, it becomes federal law, and it's the law of the land, right? And I am definitely someone who believes from the streets to the suites, and that all politics is local, but at the same time, local plus local plus local equals national. We are all connected in some way. And that if we don't help each other out, we won't get the things we need resolved. There's a reason why corporal punishment is still in existence in 19 states, is because when that work was being done, it was not being done in a collaborative way. And it wasn't pushed by people in Congress, because let's talk about who was in Congress. They were mostly white men, to resolve that problem around the country. Okay, and so that's why you have that. You asked me about other bills that are being talked about to remove law enforcement. There's not a lot of other bills. Look at us, we've had a hard time getting this one bill, CNC. The reason being is that it is considered toxic. It is considered the third rail in Congress. But what there is happening in other ways, which we can do this, is every year, the president has to do a budget. President Biden right now is working, his staff is working on that budget, and we are telling telling the White House, in your budget, you need to either reduce or remove the fundings that you send to the cops department or any kind of money that Department of Ed is using towards any of these things, any of our issues we're talking about, specifically law enforcement, right? Please stay tuned. We have a letter that's coming out, sign-on letter. We want organizations to sign on to that and get to the president's desk soon, before January, because they start this process. The second part of that is when the president gives his budget, it's a suggestion to Congress. Congress doesn't have to follow it, right? That's why when 45 was in there and people were upset, we were like, oh, he could suggest whatever he wants, but Congress can do what they want. And that process is called the appropriations process. And it sounds just like what it is. Appropriators, and you should know who your appropriators are, your members of Congress, especially if you have a member from your state on appropriations, they hold a lot of power. They should know who you are by first name, because you should be calling their office every day. We as a social justice community, we work on policies and getting things passed to help in that social justice part of our work. We leave out appropriations. In appropriations process, I can count on one hand the Black and brown lobbyists who work on appropriations. And you guys know a couple of them, Breon Wells, myself, Chris Scott, or three of them, sitting in those meetings with a bunch of white folks, because the staff is mostly white. And what they do is they dish out the money. They say how much each program will get. That's what appropriator is doing. He's taking the money and saying, okay, you Department of Ed are gonna get $5 billion, and this is how you will spend it. So that is what happens in the appropriations process. That too is starting in the next couple of weeks. And that is another area where we can tell appropriators, do not provide funds to Department of Ed so that those programs can continue to instill these programs that are harming and killing our children. So those are other ways, even though it's not legislatively done through a passing of a bill, is being done through the budget process, through the appropriations process. And so that's what we are doing as well. We have a suite of bills, because we all know that school climate cannot happen through one piece of legislation. It has to be multiple pieces of legislation. And Jamie asked, so CNC is very new. Literally, it came out last year in the 116th Congress. We are now in the 117th. Congresses are counted from the first Congress we ever had. So there is every 2 years, calendar year, January 1st to December 31st. That's one session. And then on January 1st of 2022, we'll start the second session of the 117th Congress. But in the 116th is when we got the phone call from Senator Murphy and Representative Presley that said, we'll do this bill. And we wanted to get it in so we can have historical and say, hey, it started from the 116th. It takes a very long time for bills to pass federally. And that was before, when we had Congresses, when we did have bipartisan workmanship. We don't have that now. So one of the bills Jamie's asking about or talking about in the suite, CASA, Keeping All Students Safe Act, which is about restraint and seclusion. And I've been doing disability policy since 2009. I started at TASH, T-A-S-H, for our sign language interpreter. And TASH is the organization that started this process. And in my research and looking at their old alerts, the oldest alert I found was 1976. 1976, we have been trying to change and tell people, stop tying up children, stop putting them in a box and secluding them. We got this changed in the area of healthcare, right? You are not allowed to tie somebody up and restrain them in a hospital setting or any kind of clinical setting. We got it changed in juvenile justice. You're not supposed to restrain in any way or tie up a child or youth who's in a juvenile system. But we can't get this changed in a place where a child is supposed to feel the most safe, and that is their school. And the reason being is because we have unions and teachers who continuously tell us what our children are capable of, as Ms. Ellen was talking about, and how our children should be treated, right? And so since 1976, they've been trying to change this. and it still exists. And even through educating parents and saying, please don't put this in your IEP, which is the individual's education plan, because there is no private right of action no way to sue a school or get it out of the IEP. Once it's in, you can't get it out. So that's right. This is what we're dealing with here. In reference to what co-sponsoring means on a bill. So you get a bill, I don't know, I am a bill, the schoolhouse rock thing. A bill is introduced in the House and in the Senate. We hope, right? You hope. That's called a bicameral bill, and you want that because it takes 2 bills to pass to then go to the president's desk to be signed to become a law. So when you get a bill passed and you are asking your Congress members to co-sponsor this bill, what that says is that when they co-sponsor and they tell the clerk says, oh, okay, Representative Mondary Jones, who we're trying to get on the bill, I'm going to sponsor this bill. The clerk puts their name on the bill. What does that do? At the beginning of every Congress, the Speaker of the House sets a rule and says, every bill needs to have so many co-sponsors before it gets passed in a committee or even sent to the floor for a full vote. So bills are written, you look at it, what is it covering? They send it to the committee. You'll hear people say, oh, the committee that's in charge of it. In this case, this is Ed and Labor, which is chaired by Representative Bobby Scott, Democrat from Virginia. He will say whether or not he will do. There are 3 things that need to happen for a bill. The co-sponsors need to get on there. You need to have a hearing, and you need to have what is called a markup. They review the bill, they go through every line of the bill, and they say, okay, what do we keep in? What do we take out? That's a markup. Then you have a vote on that bill in a committee. It comes out of committee, it goes to the floor. People think that Congress is very confusing. It is not. If you're a part of any civic organization, I'm a Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I am a member of the AME Church. I was a Girl Scout leader. I worked at the YWCA. Every organization works this way. You have a committee. You talk about it in a committee, you bring it to the full committee, the full body, everybody votes on it. We're gonna have a health fair and you decide in the healthcare committee, then you bring it to the full body and says, yes, we'll have a health fair. Okay, it's the same thing. So you bring this bill. What those co-sponsors mean, they are important. One, they are telling the Speaker of the House or the majority leader of the Senate, yes, I'm gonna vote for this bill. It is an important bill and it should be done there. And that shows credence. It also gives us history because, as I said, it takes years to get bills passed. I've worked on bills that it has taken 5 Congresses to get passed. That's 10 years. I told you, right? 2 years for one Congress. That's 10 years. And what happens is, and what's going to happen in 2022, and what happened in 117, 68% of our members in this Congress are new. So when we start a new Congress, or we go to 118, you don't have to like recreate the wheel. You go to the ones who were on before and you say, hey, you were on this bill in last Congress. Okay, I'll just get on. And then you can also use those co-sponsors to tell new members, hey, this is important, or this was important to the member before you and they got on and you're from your district and your members, your constituents said, get on this bill, and they will get on, right? So it gives you history. But the reason for co-sponsors is to move a bill, to get it to that point and get it to the president's desk. The last thing I'll talk about is the fact that why we are having problems with this bill. And people always say, oh, it's the Republicans. No, it is not. In this case, it is actually Democrats. We have had over 32 meetings on the Hill, all with Democrats. I said, we'll start with Democrats. I do meet with Republicans because disabilities, I meet with everybody. We were going to start Republicans in January, but we started with Democrats. And we cannot get Democrats on this bill because to them, it is toxic. Members like Maxine Waters from California, Representative Auntie Maxine, will not get on this bill. We have met with her office. We have talked to her staff over and over again. Members like Senator Gillibrand, who's from New York, right? Who I'm sure there are a lot of New Yorkers out there and the problems that New York is having around law enforcement and policing in school. And she will not get on this bill. She's asking us, well, how many New Yorkers support this? And we have a letter with 516 groups. We got about 45 New York groups. We sent it to her. We have individuals who signed that, about 60. We sent that to her. I sent that to her the last week of October. She's still not on this bill. So it's a problem, right? Bernie Sanders, who talks all the time about how law enforcement shouldn't be in schools, is still not on this bill. This bill has been out since June, and he still is not a co-sponsor, saying to Patty Murray, the chair, and Senator Schumer, I'm going to sponsor this bill. I'm going to vote yes for this bill. The Congressional Black Caucus leader, Joyce Beatty, will not get on this bill and will not tell her caucus members to get on this bill. This is a problem. The Progressive Caucus is ignoring this bill. So the reason it's important for you all to call your members and so they know who you are is there's a reason why you registered to vote and you voted. You want these members to vote and push and pass the bills you want passed, and they're not doing it. And I will tell you, they're not doing it because they're not hearing from you guys. So we need you to call. If you need help, please let us know. Kate has put information in the chat box. I'm also going to put some stuff in there in the way in which you can contact your members. If you ever are afraid or don't want to do it by yourself, I'll put my email in there. I am more than happy to join you on a call. But please always remember, as my grandmother told me, these people are no different than you and I. They live next door to you, down the street from you, around the corner from you. They just chose to run for office. They're no different. So don't ever feel afraid of calling your member or telling them how you feel. Tell them they're not doing what you asked them to do. So I just want to thank you all for this opportunity to talk. I look forward to, I know we're going to get this bill passed. Oh, that's the other thing. It will be some time. Once it passes, is a regulation process. So I want you all to be prepared and ready for that, and always be confident that the work we do, we will be champions, because our children deserve it, and we can't do anything more for them than to get these things passed.
Woo! Thank you, Dara. Yet another dissertation by Dara Baldwin, in which you covered so many things. And I just want to publicly thank you just for standing in the breach for so many folks for so long, for calling us all into this. It is overwhelming to do what you have invited us into, to hold the ways in which local organizers are doing their version of this on the ground. But you remind us constantly that we have to do it together at the federal level. So thank you for always inviting us in and for always being there. May you find rest in the near term.
Thank you. And thank you all for all the work you do. If no one has said it to you, I'm saying it to you. Thank you.
Right back to you. And with lots of love in my heart, I'm gonna hand things over to Sierra to bring one more powerful speaker in before we spend a minute or two with questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and thank you so much, Dara. I always learn so much. So I'm like, I was scribbling all my notes. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm so privileged and honored to be able to introduce Ashley Sawyer. Ashley is a senior attorney at Advancement Project National Office, and Ashley was previously the senior director of campaigns at Girls for Gender Equity. So we're so excited for your new position at Advancement Project and just all of the ways that you continue to move and shake the world in beautiful and powerful ways. So thanks for being with us. And
thank you for having me.
Yes. And so the National Campaign for Police-Free Schools defines police-free schools as dismantling school policing infrastructure, culture, and practice, ending school militarization and surveillance, and building a new liberatory education system, as Kate had shared earlier. And so when you think about this suite of bills, what promise, but also what peril do they individually and collectively offer as we push forward towards police-free schools? And I'd also offer another question too. In your work at Girls for Gender Equity, you led the creation of city, state, and national policy platforms, particularly for Black girls and transgender non-conforming young people. And so in this work, how do you see or not see policy taking into account the unique experiences of Black girls?
So first, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be in conversation with everybody on this panel. Really brilliant thinkers. I learned so much just now, and I was like taking little notes. But to your first question, I'm apologizing because I'm going to offer somewhat of a cynical perspective. And you know what? Let me take that back. It's not cynical. It's I think, a shift. So I think we're moving away, or we have to move away from the reliance on federal policy, but I don't believe that we will not be successful in our movement. Our movement will be successful. We will win, but we are going to have to look to different tools and recognize that they will have we're up against a different time period, right? So I think Dara just really summed it up for us. Even the most quote unquote progressive elected officials in this moment are unwilling to sign on to bills that are related to the decriminalization of schools, the ending the school to prison pipeline. That is no longer a cool, sexy, or exciting thing to attach your name to if you are a federal legislator. And that's just the reality that we're living in right now. And I honestly don't know that that's going to change in the next session. And so I want to just bring our attention to the fact that there are young people who are in schools right now, today, December 1st, 2021, who are experiencing the harms of this system. There are Black girls who are in school right now who are being told that their bodies are too much and that they need to cover up, and who are getting suspended or expelled or arrested in their schools for just being themselves, for speaking up for themselves, for fighting it back if they experience school-based sexual assault. We know that over just the last 2 years, there have been a number of headline events involving young Black girls. Thinking about Binghamton, New York in early 2019, 4 young girls of color were strip searched, which in my mind is a form of sexual violence at the hands of the state. They were strip searched in their middle school for laughing too much, right? So there's real harm to them. And so in the time that it would take for us to get the solutions that we want through policy, they will have graduated prayerfully from high school. They will be living their adult lives, hopefully, right? And so if we're waiting on policy, unfortunately, the harm is still happening. A whole generation of young people may have to experience being assaulted by cops in their schools, being suspended because they were a little bit late because they're helping their younger sibling get dressed for school in the morning. So I think that while federal legislation and federal policy have their place and they hold promise, I have to be thinking about the young people who next week are going to enter a school building where there's a school cop at the front door yelling at them to take the bobby pins out of their hair when they go through the metal detector, or telling them that because your shirt is too tight, quote unquote, you need to go home and now you can't be in school, and you feel embarrassed and shamed and you're not welcome in the place that is supposed to be a safety net for you. So I do have a sense of urgency in this conversation because the young people that I have been blessed to build relationships with are experiencing so much harm in the immediate, right? And so I always want to keep in mind that the policy work that we do is important and it holds promise, but I do want us to be thinking about the ways that in the interim, lives are being harmed. Young people's lives are being attacked. For a young person who gets pushed out of school, for Black girls who, like the Black girl in Eustis, Florida, who was knocked unconscious by a school cop, what happens for her next school year or this school year is real and it's important, and her education is important, and her life, her well-being, her joy, and her safety is important. And I don't want to say, hopefully in 3 or 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, there'll be a piece of legislation that possibly might make it so that your school district gets a little bit of money if they stop treating you that way. fundamentally, we have to change the ways that we think about education, public education. And I think, to be really transparent, I am really questioning if American public schools can be safe spaces for Black children. Can they be safe spaces for queer and trans non-binary students? I don't know. I really don't know if there is enough reform to make these spaces healing and joyful for our young people, but I'm going to try, right? I'm going to try, and I'm going to keep working at it. And so to your question, I was excited about the Push Out Act that was introduced by Representative Presley, but, we're living in a backlash, or what some people call a white lash moment. So the person who won the Virginia gubernatorial election, in large part, is said to have won because of stoking up fear about quote unquote critical race theory being taught in public schools, which, as a lawyer, I know that critical race theory was definitely not being taught in your 5th or 6th grade class. But there's just such an anger amongst people with power around learning about the genocide of Indigenous people, the enslavement of Black people, the oppression of Chinese and Asian folks building the westward expansion. And I could go on and on and on. And so we're living in a moment where someone like Bernie Sanders and Maxine Waters won't even get on board. I can't wait. I just cannot wait for the young people that I've represented who've been, incarcerated because of the ways that their schools have failed to provide protection for them. So I, have to overemphasize, and I say overemphasize organizing, local organizing, and really shifting the conversation away from, what maybe frankly white supremacists are saying is happening in school towards what we want to be happening in school. And sometimes policy is just inadequate at being successful until the national conversation changes, until the policy changes. And I'm curious about what ways we can take this into our own hands by demanding at the local level that schools be accountable for the way that they treat students of color and Black girls in particular. GGE, when I was there, we were successful at getting a piece of legislation passed in the New York State legislature to remove the term incorrigible from the New York Family Court Act. But as much as I am so incredibly proud of the team that I got to work with to pass that legislation, we know that it was in many ways symbolic because family court judges still don't see Black girls as human. We know from Georgetown Law's research that Black girls are seen as significantly older than their actual ages, right? The adultification. And what that means is teachers, principals, administrators, many think that Black girls know more about quote unquote adult topics, or that Black girls are more sexual. And in our homes and in our communities, we often tell Black girls that they are expected to take on family responsibilities, getting younger siblings ready for school, picking them up from school, making lunches, taking on extra jobs to support their families. Schools have not been able to make space for young people who need a little bit of support if they are taking on adult caregiving responsibilities in their homes. And so what would it look like to have legislation that incentivized schools to create pots of money and resources for young people who have a lot of family obligations to be able to get extra help after school, or to have tutors, or to have resources for their whole families? I think a lot of our support and challenges come when young people may be able to access some support, but their whole family has not been able, which is why I think there's so much promise in the community school model, where we're trying to meet the whole family's needs. And certainly there are flaws and critiques there, but systemically, we are not going to get the things that we hope for if we're not able to help parents find jobs if they need to find jobs, help them find stable, safe, clean housing. We're working in an ecosystem that is created by racialized capitalism. And so what we see in our schools is in part a microcosm of all of the other system failures. And so when we see Black girls coming to school saying like, I'm tired, I didn't get much sleep last night, and the principal or the teacher says, well, you're not allowed to leave, put your head on your desk, get out of my classroom, we're not going to fix that simply by saying schools don't suspend that girl. We're also going to have to address the issues that made it so that she wasn't able to get sleep in her home or have the safety and care that she needed. So I say that to say there's a lot of work to be done, and it has to happen at multiple levels. And unfortunately, I think that sometimes Black girls are left out of those conversations because things like Black girls taking on adult caregiving responsibilities doesn't doesn't get captured by legislation really easily. Addressing those issues doesn't really translate to a bill all of the time. And so we want to think about what are the ways that our best intentions sometimes overlook some of the core fundamental needs that are coming up in the lives of Black girls and non-binary young people. Legislation has a tendency to focus on guidance, which can sometimes not have a lot of teeth, or like sticks, taking away funding. And there's not always a lot of incentives, which is why I was excited about push out and the bills that are choosing to incentivize removing police from schools. The unfortunate thing is we're in, the white lash moment that we're in, where people are extremely, extremely apprehensive about logging on and aligning themselves with powerful legislation that could change the moment that we're living in.
Oof, wow. Thank you so much, Ashley. I really appreciate how you are pointing us to the urgency of the work right now, but also lifting up the power of grassroots community organizing, how that has always been what has shifted us towards better futures, more just futures. And also how you talked about best intentions and overlooking some of those core fundamental needs. We see that happening all of the time with the ways that SEL has been co-opted and weaponized against young people. And as we think about how policy then transitions into the implementation, we hear so often from organizers that they're like, yes, we have this incredible win, and now we continue the work because we need to make sure that it's implemented in ways that actually lift up what community has been asking for and what community has been demanding. And I also appreciate too the multiple systems failures, right? Even as we're having a conversation about education and about the suite of bills that is in front of us right now, there's so much other legislation that needs to be passed to ensure that we can actually get to the root. And I think about Angela Davis's quote about radical means simply grasping things at the root. And that's really what we have to do with this work and with legislation and with grassroots organizing, which always points us to the historical roots. So thank you so, so much, Ashley. We appreciate you. To all of the panelists, we are so grateful. As always with these conversations, we wish that we could chat all day because there's so much that we could be in conversation about. And so as we get to the point in the conversation today where we are wrapping, just to touch on some key takeaways, the needs are police-free schools. The needs are dismantling policing infrastructure. It's getting rid of and banning corporal punishment, but instead building liberatory education and funding education, as Kate pointed us to, resourcing education rather than resourcing surveillance. What we fund signals our beliefs, what we invest in signals what is important. And we want to fund things like SEL and restorative justice, but for there to be an environment for these things to actually exist and flourish, we have to dismantle the policing infrastructure. And we have to be careful to not recreate the same policing in new and repackaged forms. And so Dare also pointed us that the local plus local plus local is national. I've highlighted that in my notes, and that we need each other. We need to do collaborative work. Kate grounded us in the important fact that this legislation comes from the grassroots. Miss Ellen reminded us that we have to center community. Ashley reminded us that we have to employ both and strategies. We have to keep in mind what is happening right now while building this legislation and building this towards the future. So I'm feeling encouraged and inspired, as all of the panelists have shared, that this is long work. It's the long game. It's hard work, but it is possible, and it needs all of us, and that we will win. So thank you so much to all of the panelists, to Ashley, to Miss Ellen, to Kate, to Dara. We are so grateful for you sharing your expertise and your wisdom with us in this conversation today. Thank you to Jamie for co-moderating with me. Thank you to the CJSF squad who's on the back end, making sure all of the tech happens seamlessly. Thank you to our interpreters, Melanie and Jan. We are so grateful to you being here. Check out Joyful Signing. They are so incredible to work with. And as a next step, we will send out a resource resource sheet, the recording of this conversation, and also a list of recommendations from this conversation from our partners about what next steps are and the importance of doing this work and doing this work together. Thank you so much for being a part of our #ReclaimSEL webinar series. We hope that you download the RAD report, and we hope to stay in touch. Looking forward to future conversations to come.